Hey, good afternoon and welcome to our show today. It's about what leads to organizational agility. And the surprising answer, it's not what you think. So today we have with us Elaine Polakos, who's the CEO of PDRI, a global consultancy firm based in the Washington, D.C. area. So, hi, welcome.
Hi, Chuck. How are you today?
Great. So some of the issues that we're going to talk about today, it's like, what does organizational agility and resilience, how does it impact organizational performance? And what is this about right-sized teamwork and why it's important for organizational agility and resilience? And what is this relentless course correction? And why is that important for organizational agility and resilience and ultimately success? And this notion of stability that comes in the midst of all this change, it's so important for agility and resilience. So those are the issues that we're going to discuss. As we go forward, this is also a webcast where you can earn credits for the HCRI, SHRM, and CPE. So it's important to stay on the entire webcast for the full time. The credits are available for this live webcast only, not for the recorded version. And during the course of the webcast, the boxes will pop up. You'll need to type in which organization you're seeking credits from. And again, staying on for the entire webcast is the critical aspect of it. As I mentioned today, we already have Elaine Polakos from PDRI, and I'm Chuck Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director of Organization of Knowledge, Content, and Quality here at the Conference Board, and I'll be hosting the webcast today. So, Elaine, today's work environment, it's unrelenting change, hyper-competition. Tell us about it.
I'm so glad to be here, Chuck. Thanks so much. You know, all of us today are feeling the impacts of disruptive change. Technology is quickly changing what we're doing and how we're doing it in many different and surprising ways. And for organizations, this is creating a huge amount of unrelenting change, and it's actually bringing new and surprise competitors into the mix. There's actually a lot of talk today about the need for organizations to be agile and resilient to deal with all this change and competitive pressures. And some go as far as to say they need agility and resilience. We need agility and resilience in our organizations to even survive the business world today. And there are lots of different theories about how to get there, different approaches, different offerings from different consulting firms. We hear a lot about things like learning agility and agile teams, for example. Hold on a second, here we go. But there's been actually surprisingly little research that's looked at the actual impacts of organizational agility and resilience on organizational performance. So there's all this talk about how important it is. We don't actually know that it does lead to competitive success and survival. And furthermore, we don't have a lot of research that tells us much about what are the conditions then that allow us to create this organizational agility and resilience. So that's a big unanswered question. So at PDRI, we decided to study this, and what we did is we actually collected data. We measured 325 companies across the globe. And so it was a lot, right? This isn't just based on one or two companies, but I mean hundreds of companies, so that we could really get after three questions. And the first one was, do agility and resilience actually impact performance? I mean, because if they don't, we're kind of wasting a lot of time with a lot of hubbub about it. And then if the answer to that's yes, our second question was, well, gee, how do these things come about? What organizational conditions actually need to exist? I mean, do we have to go out and hire a bunch of agile individuals? Is that what gives us an agile organization? Or do we have to stand up all sorts of agile teams, because that's what a lot of companies are doing today? What do we actually have to do to develop agility and resilience? And then once we have the answer to that, so what does that mean for things like leader development or performance management or selection or any of the other talent practices that we have in our organizations today? So that's what we set out to do.
So we're trying to make this webcast as interactive as possible. So also, if you have questions, you just type them into the chat box on your screen. But also, we have some audience poll questions, and I think we're going to go to our first poll question. So how important are agile leaders and agile teams for building agile organizations? Is that extremely important, very important, important, minimally important, or not so important at all? We'll keep the poll open for a few more seconds. Okay, I think we seem to be having a pretty good response. Here we go. I think we can close it up. Okay, so yeah, indeed. So very important. The majority, 52%, are saying that that agile teams and leaders are important for building an agile organization. Extremely important, 34%. So the overwhelming majority, close to 90, 80, 86% or so, are saying yes, it is critical. So does that fall in line with your concept of this?
I'm smiling, Chuck, because it most certainly falls in line with what people think. But what's interesting about this is that we actually have very little research that looks at the impact of individual and team characteristics. So having agile leaders, having agile teams, how does that actually impact organizational performance? So we know very little about this. But the research that we do have that looks at other individual characteristics and other team characteristics tells us, maybe surprisingly, that there's probably no relationship between agile individuals and agile teams and how agile and effective the organization's going to be. So people are really surprised by that, but the preponderance of the research that we have says individual characteristics and team characteristics don't have much bearing on organizational performance.
So you're really looking at this notion from a more holistic sort of view, right, within the enterprise. So you're saying really that it needs the culture, the processes, and the leadership to some extent to support the maximizing the agility within.
Well, that's what we wanted to study, in fact, because we said, all right, what is it then that leads to agile organizations? If it's likely not agile individuals and agile teams, then what does this mean? And does it mean anything? Does it lead to performance? So that was our research. And I want to start out kind of telling you about this research and what we found, because I think we got some really, really interesting results. But first of all, I want to just define for you then how we defined agility and resilience for this study, because we actually were squarely focused on agility and resilience at the organizational level. We wanted to know whether that, at the organizational level, not individual and team, predicts performance, and then how do you create this overall agility of the whole organization. That's what we focused on. So for that purpose, we defined agility as, and it's right here on the screen, proactively charting a competitive path by investing in new strategies, but also, and importantly, jettisoning strategies that aren't working well anymore. So not belaboring it and hanging on to things that really aren't working. And we defined resilience as something, it's a little bit different. And this is about really the whole organization collectively remaining calm and optimistic in the face of adversity, being able to instill confidence in the enterprise as a whole, and so that it can bounce back quickly from being jolted to a state of normal operations.
So I think that's an interesting point about the jettisoning of the strategies. I mean, this notion of it's easy to engage the Velcro part of it, and it's hard to disengage, and some organizations are better at it than that. But, I think traditional leadership, right, commits to a strategy, and that's the strength, is to stay the strategy. And you're saying that you need to be more agile.
Right. If something's not working, don't hang on to it too long, That's one of the things that we thought. That was our hypothesis anyway. I want to just dive into the results here. So without much further ado, what we did is we measured these 325 organizations on agility and resilience as I just defined them. And then we looked at those companies that were publicly traded so that we could get financial data from them that was available in the public domain to answer our first question, which is, do companies who are higher on agility and resilience actually deliver higher financial performance? And I have two examples here to share with you. One where we looked at return on equity, which is an important measure of financial success for many organizations, and another one where we looked at return on investment, another important financial metric. And what our results showed was that agility and resilience are not only important indicators of financial success, they are extremely important indicators in these two cases. What these data show is that companies that are high on agility and resilience as we measured them return 500% higher return on equity and 150% higher return on investment. So really the bottom line here is agile and resilient organizations do in fact produce better financial results, and not by just a little bit, substantially so. And when you think about it, we measure, these are perceptions of how agile and resilient the organization is related to actual hard metrics of their financial performance. So in other words, you know, we're really predicting true organizational outcomes here, which is why getting such impactful differences was really, it was stunning to us, to be honest. We were amazed at these results, that it had this much impact.
So we just have a question, and we may be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but from the audience, that asks about the role of leadership and in creating the conditions for agile organizations, right? That agile leaders also role model agility, therefore they are very important. I mean, is that
role? Isn't, yeah, that isn't, well, let me say this. Agile leaders, as we typically define them, we did not find that maybe what you would expect would be what led to organizational agility and resilience. I want to just bear with me for a few minutes and let me talk about here what the conditions are that actually lead to agility and resilience, and then we'll talk about leader behaviors that will be required to enable these conditions to exist. But what I'll give you a little preview on is how we're training leaders in being agile, for example. There are some different things that came out of this research that were surprising, so I think people will be interested in learning. Again, how we typically define agile leaders and agile teams isn't necessarily what creates agile and resilient organizations. So that's the big news here.
Just to tie in, there's just another question I think that ties in with what you were just talking about is, and it's asking about your definition. What's the definition your team's created to define a resilient organization?
Well, I went over them.
Right.
Those were the two definitions. And so what we did in this research is we developed items. We talked about the ability of the organization to create new strategies that were successful and jettison strategies that weren't working. That's the definition of agility in our research. And resilience was the ability for the organization to collectively remain calm, right, absorb a jolt, and quickly bounce back to normal operations. So that's what we measured, is how well does your organization as a whole do those two things. So that's what led to, when you're high on those things, much higher financial performance. Okay?
Makes good sense to me.
Let's complete the puzzle here for folks. We looked to the literature, and we also looked at case studies of organizations that are well known for being competitively successful. And we identified 5 things that looked like they were important. So the next part of our research measured 5 things that you're seeing here, and then related those things. We wanted to see how important each one of these 5 things was in creating agility and resilience that in turn would lead to high financial performance. You're tracking okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So what we found is that, and 2 of these things you may not know what they are, and I'll explain them further in a minute, but what our research showed, and somehow the slide got a little off here, sorry folks, but the rightmost bar here actually is a measure of stability. And what our research showed, ironically, is stability has the strongest relationship, or is most important, most impactful for creating agility and resilience, which if you think about it is counterintuitive.
Right.
Right? So that's why it's interesting. So just bear with me and we'll get to what stability means and how you create it in just a minute. Second, we found that 2 other things also had pretty high and important impacts on agility and resilience, and they were right-sized teamwork and relentless course correction. And again, we'll talk about what those mean in just a sec. Now, we also measured the extent to which your organization has high employee engagement and also the extent to which it has a really solid, understood, agreed upon strategy. Those things were not entirely unimportant, but they were less important, as you can see from these. The graph, unfortunately, is mislabeled, but it's engagement, strategy. The third one, going from the left, is right-sized teamwork, and then relentless course correction, and then the final one is stability. So we're going to talk about the last three because you know what? We really need to focus on what matters most. I mean, organizations are busy, and you know, if you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, we're going to talk about the last three. So here's the puzzle. Let me just complete. Here's like the research results in a nutshell. 3 organizational characteristics: right-sized teamwork, stability, and relentless course correction are important drivers of organizational agility and resilience, as we defined them earlier. And those things, agility and resilience, in turn, lead to much higher financial outcomes. There's the story. Okay. So what I want to do now, if it's okay, is just talk about each one of these things. Starting with right-sized teamwork. Geez, sorry about that, folks. We all know that companies are increasingly using network teams to better connect work across functions. The idea here is that by doing this, we're going to improve delivery speed and effectiveness, right? These connections are actually quite important for agility and resilience. Think about it like a fabric. If you have everything connected in the right way, then if you have to change because you have connections in your organization where you need them, the whole system can be more agile. It can essentially change more seamlessly. Likewise, if you get hit with a jolt, when everything's connected, again, the whole system can flex together. Whereas if you're having work done in stovepipes that don't even talk to each other, then you have to first explain what's going on, decide what you're, because you don't have the right connections. So that's the idea here. And with increased network teams have come initiatives to drive teamwork and collaboration. So as a result, many, many companies that we've been working with, and we've seen this all over the place, have been introducing new competencies around, teamwork and collaboration, telling people they have to do more of that and in fact, do as much as you possibly can. Companies have been training leaders and team members on how to collaborate better, and they've actually, you see a lot of expectations now in performance management that you're going to go collaborate well with everyone. And the assumption is that we've been making that more is better. So we should be maximizing teamwork and collaboration.
Well, obviously the issue around questions about rewarding and incenting teams is an issue that we hear from our members all the time. The difficulty in recognizing and then rewarding that work done in teams. The performance management systems have not kept pace with some of the reorganization side. So that's as I say, that's an issue that we hear frequently from our members, and one of the challenges about organizing in teams. And I think this notion of team governance, right? That's the big issue. The alignment of those teams with the overall business strategy is, again, one of the more difficult areas that we hear from members. And that seems to tie in with what you're saying about the interconnectedness of those teams.
Yep. All of those issues are important. And we'll talk about, though, I think, where we're getting this right and where we may be missing the boat a little bit in terms of how we're thinking about teamwork and collaboration in just a couple of minutes, because our research showed some really interesting things. I think we have a polling.
We do have another polling question that is coming up now. If we can see that poll question. There we go. The second poll question, and as we're waiting for this poll question to come up, there is another question from the audience, and it's about engagement. And so it's interesting when you say that engagement matters the least, giving the focus that that goes on to improve employee engagement in so many organizations. So what would you suggest around engagement and the priority it should be getting in a firm?
Look, engagement has been related to a lot of different things, and we know from past research that it's very important. So I would say whatever people are doing in terms of engagement, it leads to important outcomes, continue doing it. And by the way, engagement did have a significant positive impact on agility and resilience. It's just when we stacked it up against some other things, there were a few other things that if your goal is agility and resilience, it's going to lead to higher performance outcomes at the organizational level, there are some other things that are going to just have more impact. It doesn't mean that engagement isn't important, because it was. It just means that there are other things that are actually more important. And we'll explain why as we go through it. There's just a more direct link between the three things that I've called out: stability, right-sized teamwork, and relentless course correction, for driving agility and resilience specifically.
Right.
So you can't study the whole universe of things that's going to have an impact, so I'm not saying engagement's unimportant.
Right.
It is. It's just if you have to pick and choose, what this research shows us is that you might want to focus on these other things first.
Right.
That's all.
So in some ways, engagement is the key money, if you will, too, right?
Well, engagement's going to be good for predicting other things, other outcomes, and that's been shown by research. So I would say don't ignore engagement. It's certainly an important thing. But if you want to drive agility and resilience and high performance on the metrics that we used in this research, then you would want to focus first on some other things.
Right.
That's all.
I'm curious to hear more about the stability notion and the counterintuitiveness of a constant change in stability seem to be a polar opposite.
Right. But there's actually a logical argument for it. I don't know if the poll question
if we can go up to the poll question. Poll question 2. Are we up on that? Okay, we seem to have a little technical issue on the poll question. All right, we're going to just try and get it back up. So bear with us for a moment. This is the whole thing about digital transformation and technology issues, right?
Yeah.
All right. So the poll question is up. So how easy is it for your organization to collaborate with others to get work done? A pretty fundamental question about the issues of collaboration. So we're looking at extremely easy, very easy, and neither easy nor difficult. Difficult or very difficult. So we'll just keep it open. The poll is now closed. Okay, so most sizable minority, 45%, plurality, if you will, neither easy nor difficult. 26% say it's very easy. Only 5% say extremely easy, and 22% say it's difficult. Yeah. So does that fit in with what you see from the organizations that you studied?
Actually, it does. I would say that those are more positive results, though, than we found in our research, quite frankly. And I wanted to share with you some data, because we're still talking about right-sized teamwork and what that means for us and why it's so important for agility and resilience. And bear in mind that the last point that I made was that the way that many organizations are approaching teamwork and collaboration is more is better, right? And we're having all kinds of interventions, from new competencies to training, et cetera, to try to drive as much teamwork and collaboration as possible. But when we look at the outcomes of those efforts, we see what we're now showing on this slide. This is what people are reporting. They're finding that work is showing 44% of respondents, survey of 10,000 people, reported that work is becoming increasingly complex. They're reporting increased requirements, more steps, more hoops to jump through to get things done that are actually making work harder. 56% report higher demands, more information overload. And look at the next couple of statistics. 80% of employees say they don't know how to collaborate with coworkers. They don't even really know what this means. So for all the efforts that we're putting in to implement new competencies around teamwork and collaboration and drive more teamwork and train people to be more collaborative and engage in more teamwork, what employees are telling us is, yeah, in a general sense, we kind of get what it means, but we don't know how to do it. We can't translate the general case to what am I supposed to do on my job. And moreover, if you look at the last statistic here, 60 to 90% of teams are failing or derailing. That's a lot, you know? And so the question becomes, why? And the reality is, and we found this in our research, that teamwork and collaboration are actually quite hard. People don't really understand each other's work. They're not sure how to collaborate productively. And oftentimes we end up talking past each other and inadvertently stepping on each other's toes when we first try to collaborate and engage in teamwork. And the other problem is that because teamwork and collaboration are the big initiatives and buzzwords today, it's like companies they've almost started overachieving it. Whenever anything needs to get done, it's like, well, let's get a diverse team to tackle it. And our view is, based on our research, that we're overdoing that. And we're actually making work harder because we're not right-sizing teamwork and collaboration. We're overdoing teamwork and collaboration. And I ask people sometimes, it's funny, I'll ask you this, Chuck. Have you ever gotten together with a bunch of people that you're supposed to work with on a team? You divide and conquer. We're all going to go off and I'm going to do this, you're going to do this, the other person's going to do this. 2 weeks later, you all come back together, and what you find is 3 people actually did the same thing slightly differently, and 2 things didn't get done at all. Have you ever experienced something like that?
To some extent, but I think here, at least the conference board, that we're aware of the shortfalls of this teamwork, and so there's so much about clear communication, about clear transparency, about the racy notion about who's responsible, who's accountable for the team and the teamwork, and that seems to get a focus. Once the notion of accountability is set up within that team, and the responsibilities are then clearly mandated, that stuff gets done.
You know what, though? I want to suggest something different. Because our research did not show that you're typical racy and that's always the answer. So what our research showed is actually the most agile and resilient and financially successful companies don't actually assume more teamwork and collaboration is better. And in fact, they don't overdo teamwork and collaboration. People take time to step back and look at actually what is the work that we need to get done here, and analyze the work and ask the very important question of how much and what type of teamwork and collaboration are actually required to do this particular task or piece of work most efficiently and effectively. So what I'm suggesting to everyone here is that the answer is not implement a RACI, set up a team necessarily. It's stepping back to first ask, do we really need a team here? Do we really need to collaborate here? And giving people permission to say, you know what? No, this particular piece of work is a one-person job. Let the person go do it. We don't need 14 people all getting in a room to all understand what this person's doing who has the perfect skills to just go do the work. And when we bring in too many people and we create too much teamwork and collaboration, we overdo it, and it introduces more complexity and more chaos into work situations that actually get in the way of performance.
Right.
That's what our research showed. But I will say to you, it's important, and I wanted to share with folks that there's kind of a continuum of teamwork and collaboration that's important to think about. It's important to step back and ask yourself, how much and what type of teamwork and collaboration do we need to do this task as a first step? Sometimes true teamwork is needed, and that's shown on the right. And this is where multiple people need to get together to do something that's ill-defined, it's interdependent, and it requires creating as you go, which, of course, is going to require a lot of teamwork and collaboration. But as we studied work in our 325 different organizations, what we found, and this was more often than not, is that people simply need to coordinate and connect their independent work at the right time and ensure it fits together well, and that's on the left. So in this case, collaboration can mean something as simple as a handoff. Like I have to give you a piece of information, or maybe I have to share a resource with you, and that's it. We don't have to over-engineer that. We don't need to get a diverse team together to discuss it. I just need to give you what you need at the right point in time. Likewise, maybe we have to take two pieces of independent work that you and I both produce, but we have to now fit them together. So I may need to make some changes, you may need to make some changes, and we just have to figure out, how to make it fit. That's another type of teamwork and collaboration that also is much more simple than what we call true teamwork. In most cases in organizations today, the work actually isn't true teamwork. So getting back to performance management, people are worried about, well, how do I manage performance in teams? How do I reward? How do I set goals for teams? That only really becomes relevant when it's true teamwork. When the work is mostly independent and just needs to be connected and coordinated properly, that's mostly individual work. And so it shouldn't be mistaken for teamwork.
So one of the questions that has come in, and I think it's an interesting one, is that what role or department actually assesses how much teamwork or collaboration is required to do a given project or a given work stream?
The workforce needs to be enabled, leaders need to be enabled, and you just have to step back and say to yourself, and let me move to the next slide, because it's not that hard. To what extent are the work tasks that we need to perform here interdependent, or should they be done independently? And it's just what's the most efficient and effective. A lot of times we get people participating in work, they really don't have the expertise or skills. They're just part of a diverse team. And there's sometimes an individual or a department who just should take it and run with it. But we over-engineer it by bringing too many people into the room, too many people into the discussion who maybe shouldn't be there, quite frankly. I mean, with all due respect. But we also need to ask these other questions. Where and why are connections needed? And you have to view this from a viewpoint of what's going to optimize performance? What's going to be the most efficient and effective? What's the nature of the connections you need to make? How much collaboration is really needed? And is it a handoff? Or is it an integration? Or is it true teamwork? By having these discussions to start, you can right-size the amount of teamwork and collaboration that are needed to get something done, and anybody can do this. It's a mindset of how you're approaching work and making decisions about when to stand up a team versus not, and it helps you from overdoing it and over-engineering it and creating, wasting people's time, quite frankly. So you have to give people permission instead of saying, no, you have to collaborate on everything. The answer is collaborate when it makes sense. Define what type and amount of collaboration you need, when you need it, be clear on that, and then go off and do your work. And that really does help build much more efficiency and effectiveness and higher performance.
Right, this notion of collaboration overload, right, is one of the listeners talked about. But
yeah.
We do have a question about measurement, and just kind of going back to the beginning here, is that how are the most agile, resilient organizations measuring the impact of their workplace design and alternative workplace design on their resilience and agility? I mean, what are they doing to measure the impact of their org?
I'm not sure I know that, honestly, because what we did is we went to the literature and we looked at case studies of successful organizations, and we identified things that they seem to be doing differently. And then we measured 300 organizations on those things. And then we said which of these are most important for creating organizational agility and resilience. And then we asked, does organizational agility and resilience predict organizational performance? So we didn't measure every organization on every single thing that it does, like workplace design and stuff. We only measured those things that were hypothesized, that we saw in case studies that successful organizations seem to be doing differently. And so one of them was right-sizing teamwork rather than maximizing teamwork. So we measured that. And another one was stability. So we measured aspects of stability. And then what we were able to show is of all the things that we measured, 5 things came out as being important, and the top 3 were right-sized teamwork, relentless course correction, and stability. So, I mean, I can tell you what we found, and that those things are very important and have a very strong relationship to financial outcomes, but things we didn't measure, I really can't speak to.
So there's another question, too, about how much time do you expect leaders to spend on on the organization side of this topic, right? It seems that, to quote, it seems this is a lot of work in itself, taking away from the work that needs to be done.
That's not true. It actually improves the ability to get work done. It allows people to approach their work with more simplicity and clarity so that they know it defines what collaboration and teamwork means for the work that each individual is doing. And this is a fairly quick discussion. This is not a lot of process. You know, I think sometimes we think in terms of building big processes. This is common sense. It's like you have a discussion, and we've implemented these ideas in organizations, and including our own. You have a discussion about, look, what of this, we have a whole piece of work we need to do here. There are pieces of it. Are they better off being done individually, independently, or do we actually need to put a team on it? And because teamwork and collaboration introduce complexity, unless there's a good reason to put a team on it, just assign it to an individual. It's what pieces of work need to connect. How do they need to connect? And at what point in time do they need to connect? And is it a handoff? Am I just going to hand off something I produced to you? Do we have to integrate it? This is like a common sense discussion. It's a matter of just introducing the mindset and letting teams have a common sense discussion about who needs to be involved. And if you need different points of view or whatever, then you include them. There's no one right answer to this.
I was going to say, so there's no formula, no template, no toolkit that
this
kind
is
of
common
gets this right.
sense. This is literally common sense. You know, it's, do we need to have 50 people in a discussion on a phone call? And you know what happens? 48 of them sit there and do their email and don't really pay attention. So, like, why do we have 50 people on the call? This is common sense. But you know, if you look at what people are saying is going on in work environments, there's a lot of swirl and a lot of extra work because we're overdoing these things when they don't really need to be overdone. But anyway, I'm concerned because I kind of would love to get through the rest of this.
Carry on.
So yeah,
there's a lot of good questions coming in.
Yeah, I know, but you know, I'd rather. Yeah, I kind of think we need to get through this all because people will miss out on some, I think, very important points. And I'm happy to talk to people afterwards if that's important. But relentless course correction. This is a mindset that really needs to be driven and adopted throughout the organization. This is the second key factor that's important in creating agility and resilience. And this is about creating a persistent collective focus on performance by monitoring emerging requirements, metrics, and continually adjusting to raise the bar. Now, what this requires is when you're working in an interconnected work environment, which we all are, it's identifying a few key metrics. And again, this is not formulaic, it's common sense. What are a few key metrics that we can monitor here that tell us, as a team, as an entire group of people who's working on something interconnected, whether we're doing well, we're meeting what the expectations would be in terms of like delivery schedule, time, whatever the metrics are, and when are the numbers changing so that it's an indicator that something is not going right. That's what this is about. Now, these metrics are very important. They need to be carefully selected. There can't be too many. They need to be meaningful. They need to be interpretable. But basically what we want to do is nudge or help people see when the whole system is performing well together and when something may be going off the rails. So metrics are going to need to be tailored for each situation. And again, you don't want to overdo it here. You just want to give people some indicators. Metrics are really useful when you have interconnected performance for agility and resilience. They actually help a lot overcoming the challenges with feedback. Because as you know, as much as we've tried to improve feedback over 50, 100 years for a very long time, 82% of performance management heads still believe that most of their managers aren't capable of having an effective feedback conversation. And most of the feedback doesn't really land that well that people get. It's neutral to negative. So what metrics do for us is they take kind of inherently complex work situations that we're dealing with today. They give you something to monitor to know when things are on track or not on track, but they actually get people more accustomed to continuous and objective measurement, and they reduce the pressure on people to have to raise performance problems. Like the metrics become the bad guy. You know how it is.
Right.
There's an elephant in the room. Everybody knows there's a performance problem, but nobody will bring it up or address it. And people are so grateful then when somebody says, hey, time out, we got to fix something here. Well, the metrics help you get there more quickly. So what then you need to do to kind of complete the picture on Relentless course correction is once issues are surfaced, people need permission and strategies to help unpack whatever issues exist and solve problems. And we don't train people to do this. We don't give them any tools to do this. But methods like the 5 Whys from Six Sigma are really helpful. They're very easy to train people on. And what we're saying is, look, we have complex interconnected performance going on in organizations today. There are going to be a lot of problems that actually don't stem from individual competency gaps, but they're rather, those connections. We don't have the right collaboration and teamwork. We're not being efficient. We're not being effective. So we're going to have performance issues that stem from the system not coming together in a connected way, the way it needs to for agility and resilience. So it's identifying these, and it's kind of giving everybody permission to raise their hand, call out the problem, and say, look, let's solve it together. And this, again, is not hard to enable people on. It's a mindset. It's getting people to just be willing to raise and solve problems with their coworkers. And it's not, it's not the manager doing this. It's every single person becoming aware that, when we see something, let's root cause it and try to figure out how to solve it. Sometimes it'll be an individual, but oftentimes not. So let me just wrap this one up. Relentless course correction. So what our research showed is that the most competitively successful companies do, in fact, relentlessly course correct. They make critical performance metrics available that allow people to track their performance in real time. They identify and call out needed improvements quickly and non-defensively, and then they use structured techniques well to actually solve problems. And these things, because you're able to address problems quickly and resolve them, and people aren't afraid, they make you more agile and resilient. This isn't rocket science here, this is common sense, right?
Right. So just a quick question.
Sure.
Leaders, part of the problem, a question from our audience is that part of the problem is that often leaders don't know the business well enough to be able to make those calls on what should be connected and what doesn't. And I think a corollary to that is this notion, or the notion of artificial intelligence being introduced into the whole systems, and can it help identify the most efficient possible routes to achieve an end result, to achieve that? Does
like what should be connected, or
is there a role for AI or any part of the AI spectrum that can start to help or even contribute to these teams in the collaboration side? Does that change the game at all?
Probably, but I think it's actually more straightforward than that. Leaders, I will argue, do know. If you have to coordinate with another department to get something done, you know it, because you can't finish your process. You can't finish getting something delivered unless somebody else is involved. You do know. There are these kind of meta connections that you want to make for maybe the perfect world, but let's start small. These are the obvious connections that are needed. And I know, and I've seen this happen in many, many organizations that we've worked with, we are just, when we need to do something, new project or something like that, we're jumping to a diverse team. And by the time you cover off on all the different functions and geographies and demographics, you've got a big team. And it can be hard to organize. And in our own organization, and what we've worked with and successfully done with others, is we just say, look, how many people really need to be involved in getting this thing done? Who? And let's all accept that we're not going to all be involved in each other's work, but let's just figure out when and where we need to come together. And leaders do know, because it's obvious. This isn't about connecting everything across the whole organization. This is, let's start with the obvious connections that we need to make to get our own work done. It's much more straightforward than that.
I think within our organization too, we've seen that, and we've gone from this notion of a really big inclusive sort of approach to leadership groups and team meetings, and we're now going back to more of who needs to be there and who contributes.
Exactly, because you find out you get so many people in a room wasting their whole day collaborating, and then they have to work many more hours to get their real work done, and they burn out, and etc. I do think one of the most interesting findings is about stability. So maybe we could I just want to make sure that I get this in so folks hear about stability, given its counterintuitive nature.
So we do have one more poll question we can go through really quickly. So we're asking, how important are themes of driving change and doing more with less in your organization? So is it extremely important, very important, important, minimally important, or not important at all? So we'll see. All right. We're going to close the poll shortly. Okay, we're so extremely important, 42%, very important, 30%, so an important 22%. So overwhelmingly, this notion of themes of driving change and doing more with less are embedded in organizations these days.
Yep. And, I think that is true of all of us. Certainly is true in my own organization and those that we work with. But I want to talk about stability a bit, because we're going to come back to these notions of driving change and doing more with less. They're not bad ideas, but at an extreme, maybe they have some unintended consequences that I think I'd love to share with people. If you think about most of our contemporary leadership models, they do include competencies, right, about being able to drive change. And that's a lot of what agile leadership is about. But our research showed that actually leaders driving stability may be more important for organizational performance and actually for organizational agility and resilience than driving change. So it's totally paradoxical and counterintuitive, but the logic is simple. When we feel tired or fearful, just think about your own self. It's hard to cope if one more thing hits you. It's like you're tired. It's like, oh no, I can't take one more thing today. And that's true with organizations. But when we feel strong, confident, secure, we've had enough sleep, one more thing hits us, we're like, it's fine, I can handle it. When we're stable, when we're feeling calm, when we're not under some sort of stress and crisis, it's easier to absorb change, and it's easier to rebound from jolts. It's every human being, I think probably feels that. Well, the same does hold true at work. The more stable and secure the work situation, the better people are able to be agile and absorb change, be resilient. And so the role of leaders in this case is not necessarily to drive change, but an important role that leaders can play is to remove fear and actually be much more intentional about building stability into the environment. Because when they do this, people are less distracted and they're better able to remain focused on performing. Because when you have unstable situations, people are worried about what's going to happen. People are fearful. There's too much change. There's too much complexity. They actually get distracted from performing their jobs. And they waste a lot of time talking to each other about how upset they all are. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It takes away from performance. But if you can create stable environments where people are generally happy and feel secure, they focus more on getting their work done because they're not distracted by these other things. And that's why stability is so important for agility and resilience. The collective behavior of leaders actually does play a big role in driving stability into the environment. But this is different than what you usually see the leader behaviors are that are associated with individual agility, which the agile leader, for example. But this is about behaviors that stabilize work. They're going to come in a variety of forms. And again, there's not a formulaic, do these 3 behaviors and you will have a stable environment. You have to think about what's going on in your organization and just think through What would, instead of, how can I drive change how can I stabilize the situation? To just allow people to focus more on their work. And I'll give you a few examples. If you're hit with a jolt, developing concrete plans and just communicating how you're going to address the jolt is stabilizing, because people can say, okay, there's a plan out there. They're thinking this through. I know, we know what's going to happen, and we can monitor progress. Even though we might be in a bad state today, we can see that there's light at the tunnel for getting out of this. Ensuring that people have enough resources. This is where the doing more with less can get really tricky, because actually when people don't have enough resources, it stresses them out. They get burnt out. It's very destabilizing, because they don't know, well, can't the organization afford it? Are we going down the tubes? People create all kinds of concerns, and that's destabilizing. So what does it do? It gets people talking about how stressed out and burned out they are and not performing. Another thing is just reassuring employees, and you can't always do this, but about their status. Yes, technology change is coming, but we have some plans in place. We're going to retrain people, or whatever the case is, to just get people to focus on work rather than to be worried about what's going to happen in the future. And leaders showing up with optimism. Believe it or not, optimism is a very important characteristic for stabilizing an environment. But it's kind of being the cheerleader, and yes, we can, as opposed to no, the world's caving in. So these are the things that our research showed are stabilizing. One final thing is leaders can drive both stability and innovation by allowing for experimentation and failure. This doesn't mean allowing employees to act irresponsibly without thinking, but rather this is about really creating an environment that welcomes thoughtful ideas, tries new things, and responds to failure without finger pointing and blame. Those types of environments end up being much more stabilizing for employees than, the opposite of those things.
There's just, a couple of points. So there's our change, the Conference Board's Change and Transformation Council group has a really nifty little tool that works at the level that's basically 5 questions that addresses those issues about how is the change impacting our team and then me as an individual. It's team-led, it's not leader-led. Mm-hmm. And just being able to get aligned and being transparent in how you see the change affecting you, and then helping other members on your team try and get to a common vision as to what the impact is going to be on the individuals within, and that's the stability notion. I think that
yep.
that makes a lot of sense. That
yep.
that open and clear and transparent communication is so important. And I think when you talk about being a cheerleader, though, the issue of authenticity, right?
Yes.
It has to come
from the heart. It has to be real. It has to. As a leader, you need to feel, and the organization needs to feel optimistic that it can get out of its own trouble at some point, or that we can stabilize things, and there is a path to, even though we're going through a tough change, to because people can't live with really constant chaos all the time. As human beings, I think that's the problem. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to be experiencing constant change, but it's an issue of how are we creating an environment for change to occur that's going to help it occur in a more managed way that doesn't seem so desperate and stressful for people. Because the latter things, they really do interfere with agility and resilience. You can't bounce back quickly if you're worried, stressed out. It just doesn't work so well. And you can't change as quickly. So it's kind of an interesting self-fulfilling prophecy there. But in a nutshell, just wrapping up this idea, is what we found is that competitively successful companies create stability by removing distraction and worry so that people can focus squarely on their work instead of fretting about their future or what's going to happen or how complex and difficult their current situation is. And we do this by building trust, to your point, communicating transparently, instilling, believing in ourselves, having confidence, and then providing enough resources that people can actually do their work without completely burning out. It's simple stuff, but it does really create a foundation of stability that then allows organizations to be more agile and resilient. So again, it's common sense, I think.
Yeah, certainly one of the things you always hear, there's very few people that have more than enough resources, right? So that's the constant tension within any organization.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things where you just don't want to push it to the point where people, I mean, this. I think most leaders know this. When you can kind of push people a little bit and they can really do more with less, right, versus now we've really pushed too hard and people are starting to suffer and really truly burn out. And you can see it. I mean, you can see it every day. You feel it in the environment. But let me just wrap up here with my part of this, and then we'll, maybe not have so much time for questions, sorry. But let me just very quickly, our research showed, first of all, in fact, how important agility and resilience are for organizational performance, financial performance. These things do, in fact, deliver higher outcomes for organizations. So there's something to pay attention to. But in addition, we identified concrete behaviors for leaders and teams, things that they can do that frankly just aren't that difficult to create the conditions for agility and resilience to exist. Right-sizing teamwork, and the goal here is to simplify and clarify how you need to work with other people, what that looks like, what good looks like, so that people know how to collaborate, and it doesn't create chaos, complexity, and make work harder than it needs to be. Relentless course correction to continually raise the bar to solve problems in real time is important for agility and resilience. And then stability, which enables people to actually focus on their work instead of fretting about the future. But ironically, these are opposite of what we've been doing to a large extent, which is, instead of focusing on driving change, leaders focus on driving stability. Instead of maximizing teamwork and collaboration, right-sizing teamwork and collaboration. And instead of doing performance management with a formal system that doesn't really provide people good metrics to monitor what's going to happen in real time, that gets in the way of agility and resilience. So if we can switch that up a bit and do more in the real time to manage and monitor performance, it's going to help our agility and resilience. So the bottom line here of this research is we just need to counterbalance. We've got a lot of change, a lot of complexity, a lot of disruption. And rather than adding on to that, what leads to agility and resilience is getting that under control and not making it worse, but in fact simplifying, clarifying, and helping people get work done more easily. That's really the bottom line of this research.
It's very interesting. I just thought if we can work in one more question if we do have time. But
absolutely.
So it's about the role of agile or scaled agile methodologies.
Yep.
How do they play in? What role does it play in helping to achieve the right size teamwork and the stability and the relentless course? I mean,
it's different, right? You have this thing called agile teams and agile methodology, and there was articles again coming out like really think about what you're doing. That's not a pill to get to organizational agility or resilience. And in fact, you have to look at whether agile teams fit the work that you're doing. They're not going to probably fit every team. They should be used judiciously. And if you implement agile teams, given what our research showed, you need to worry about the things that I talked about here if you want to achieve organizational agility that leads to higher financial performance. I said in the beginning, agile teams and agile individuals won't necessarily lead to organizational agility and performance. So you just need to look at, are the agile teams and agile methodology appropriate, effective for the work we need to do in this team? And in some cases they will be, and in other cases they won't be, but they're not a panacea for getting to organizational agility. These things are.
That's a good answer. We are getting up to time, and for those of you still on the broadcast, this is the surprise at the end, and your reward for staying with us for what I thought was a really thoughtful and thorough discussion on the notion of agility and resilience within the organizations. So we do have our Change and Transformation Conference. coming up in June in New York, and if you use when you sign up, if you use that KN1 code, it's a $500 discount, substantial discount for this upcoming conference. I do a lot of work with our change and transformation councils and groups, and I have to recommend that. I think in many cases they're on the cutting edge of helping people manage these kind of issues. So I would highly recommend this conference in June. Do sign up, do use the code. And from us here in New York, I'd like to say thank you for listening and have a good day.